All right, so we are going to finish our flourless chocolate cake, and that starts with getting it out of our cake pan. So this is frozen, which means it's going to be really easy to get out of the pan. So we're going to start with a paring knife, which is the knife I have in my hand, and I'm just going to run it along the sides, pushing up against with the flat side of the blade. So the flat side is up against the cake pan. So I'm just going to run it around. I'm not turning the blade towards the cake, and I'm not turning it towards the pan. So I don't want to pull up metal shards if I do that, and I also don't want to cut into my cake. It's just more like loosening. You could also do this with an offset spatula, but paring knife has a thinner blade, so it's usually a little bit easier. So I just want to go all the way around. A lot of times I'll go twice, and then I'll turn it upside down and see if it'll come, and just like that, ta-da! That's why that parchment paper is just so easy. It's so foolproof, just like that, super easy. So I want to peel off that parchment. Obviously, we don't want to eat that parchment. And then because it's frozen, I can very easily flip it back over, and it's going to hold its shape. And then just real quick with my hands, if I have any little kind of crummies that don't look quite as neat as I would like, I can just neaten that up real quick, move it to my sheet pan, and that is ready for some ganache. All right, so it's time to make our chocolate ganache. And remember, ganache is just a combination of warm, boiling heavy cream, or scalding heavy cream added to our chocolate. So I'm gonna make kind of a flat, even layer of the chocolate in this bowl. And I kind of wanted you to just see, because you probably can see in the video that there's kind of some different chocolate. So this one that I'm pointing at that looks regular, that one's just like a fresh new chocolate chip. This one has some kind of white on it. So that just means it's lost its temper. They turn the AC off in the school over the summer on the weekend. So it's just gotten out of temperature. If I rub my finger on it, that white just goes away. All it is a little fat or a little sugar coming to the surface. It's only just an aesthetic, a visual difference. It's nothing to do with taste. It's going to melt just as good. So don't feel like you have to throw chocolate out if it does that. I know that chocolate isn't old. I bought it just before the closure, so I know that it's fine. It's just out of temper. I probably wouldn't use it on chocolate chip cookies necessarily, or if it was going to be decorative, something. But for this, it doesn't matter. It's just going to melt, no worries. So now I'm just waiting for my heavy cream to come up to a boil. And I can see a little bit of simmering on the edge, which is awesome. You never want to walk away from dairy because it can boil over really, really fast. Always want to remember that because it is a hot mess to clean up. So as soon as it's ready, I'm going to pour it over the chocolate chips, and I'm going to let it melt. It's always tricky because you want to stir it, but you don't want to stir it. It's going to melt a lot more evenly if you don't stir it. All right, so I just came up to my boil. I turned off my heat, and then I'm going to pour it all over the surface. I'm going to make sure all of my chocolate is covered, being really careful to do that. And this is a kind of this is a 1-to-1 ratio. That's going to give me a little bit of a thinner ganache. If I wanted it to be thicker for something else, maybe I would do a 2-to-1. It's been a minute since I poured that cream over it, and now I'm just going to very gently stir it in together. Very, very gently, because I don't want to incorporate tons of air into it, because if I get a lot of air, then I'll get little air bubbles in my ganache, so I don't want to do that. So I'm just being really, really gentle. Now, most people chop their chocolate up really fine for a ganache, because that ensures that it's going to melt evenly. I'll have to say sometimes I'm a little lazy when I am using chocolate chips, because they're already kind of small, where sometimes it works just fine. In this video, it was a little cold that day, so it didn't quite melt all the way, so I'll put it on a double boiler here in a second. But in my mind, chopping chocolate's kind of labor intensive, and it makes 2 dishes dirty, a cutting board and a knife, versus a double boiler, which is just a pot. And if you don't get any chocolate on it and it's just water, you don't actually have to wash it. You can just dry it, as long as you don't contaminate the handles with anything. Or you can just leave it on your stove for when you need a double boiler later in the day. So that's kind of how I do my my ganache. I would say probably most pastry chefs don't do it that way, but in my mind, it's just a little bit more quick and efficient. So So this doesn't quite melt all the chocolate. You can see there's a couple little chips still left in that. So I am gonna put that on a double boiler here in a second. So I just popped it on a double boiler real quick just to gently melt the rest of that chocolate. And now it's all melted and ready to go. So it's time to put the ganache on. Something I like to do whenever I'm using chocolate is, and I take it off a double boiler, I like to wipe the bottom of the bowl just because there's always kind of water that's built up there and it can get a little messy. And chocolate typically hates water, so it's really good practice to kind of get in the habit of. So now I'm going to take my ganache and I'm going to pour it over the top and I'm going to split it up between the two. Maybe save a little bit to make sure I have enough on each. And then I'm going to take my offset spatula and I'm going to begin to spread it out. Now these cakes are frozen, so the ganache will set up kind of fast. So you don't want to kind of dawdle. You don't want to leave and walk away and try to come back to it later. You definitely want to take care of it right away. I could grab a turntable. If I had tons of these to do, I'd grab a turntable, make it a little fast and easier. But for today, I'm just going to use straight on my my sheet pan. And I'm going to do a little bit of different design for each of these because I think it's important to test out things to see what you like, what you don't like. So I'm going to take this one all the way to the edge and I'm going to let it kind of drip down the side and see if I like that for this plate of dessert. And then this one, I'm going to not take it all the way to edge, so I have kind of like a color contrast between the light brown and the dark brown that I think might be kind of interesting. So two different ways. So like I said, it's always good to kind of experiment. I think that a lot of pastry chefs kind of forget that sometimes. They get really, really busy. But it is a good idea to kind of test and see what's going to look better, what's going to taste better. Especially for you guys at your stage, it's really important to remember that. So I'm just going to make this as smooth as I can. It looks like I'm leaving maybe like 3/4 of an inch edge around the sides, again, just to have kind of a contrast. And I think I'll come back to this one and see if I can get a couple more little drips coming down. You know, and it kind of might depend. So for a plate of dessert, I think I like the non-dripping one with the light brown around the edge. I think I like that better. But if I was selling this as a whole cake, I think the drips kind of are a little nice. It just kind of like has this like kind of chocolate decadence appeal. So again, it kind of depends on what you're doing with it. For this use, we're going to use it as a plate of dessert, but some other time we may, you know, want to sell these whole, like, that'd be a great thing for a holiday season. Flourless chocolate cake is pretty popular at the holidays. So that could be a really good option. So last thing I can do with a clean spatula is I can just go in and kind of pop any kind of big bubbles that I have. As long as my ganache isn't starting to set up yet, I can just pop a couple of them just to give it just a little bit more of a cleaner look. And that's all it takes. So this is going to go into the freezer again because this is going to cut way better when it's frozen and the ganache is frozen. I'm not going to wrap this in saran wrap because if I do, I can mess up the pretty finish that I have. So it's going to go straight in. I definitely would never want to do this more than 24 hours before an event for that reason because it won't be wrapped up. So the ganache is all set up. And my cake is frozen, so it is time to get it cut. So my mise en place for that is a cutting board, a large chef's knife, a clean towel, and a tall vessel of some sort of very hot water. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my cake over here, which is very easy to pick up because, like I said, it is frozen. It wouldn't be very easy to lift if it was thawed. Then I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to put it in that hot water, and that's just going to heat my knife up a little bit. It's going to help me make really nice clean slices because it's hot. I kind of almost melt through the chocolate very quickly. It also means a little less pressure that I have to put down. And then I'm going to wipe it off on my towel, so I don't need a bunch of water. So I have two things. My knife is hot but also dry. So that's exactly what I want. So I want to cut this into 8. And instead of trying to cut slices like this way and hope that I get 8 even pieces, I'm going to start by cutting it in half, and then I'll cut it in half again, and then I'll cut each of those in half to give me 8 pieces. So I'm going to start in half, and I'm going to try to get the best that I can. So sometimes I like to make a little bit of line. It kind of depends on what you're doing, but sometimes I do. And then I'm just going to cut straight down, and I want to not kind of pick my knife up and down. I just want to press straight through and then pull through like that. And then you'll see my knife is really dirty, so it goes back into my water. So now it's going to heat up my knife, but it's also going to help me clean off my knife. So into the water, and then I'm going to wipe off all that chocolate, because if it was still on my knife, it would make my next cut really messy, and I don't want that. So I'm going to do the same thing. So now I'm going to cut it in half in the other direction, and that's going to give me 4 pieces. Just like that. Now I have 4, and now I need 8. So I'm going to cut each of these fourths in half. And if you don't have a knife that's this long, that's okay. You can kind of cut, like, eyeball what half is. Like if I was trying to do it like this, right? So I can eyeball what halfway is. I can just cut here. It's also a little bit easier as well. And as I go, I can either move the cake, or I can actually move the cutting board so I can get a little bit of a better angle. But really making sure that I am cleaning my knife in between each cut, so I have nice clean cuts as I go along. I'm trying to get all the water off of the knife as well as I do it, so I don't get any water drips. Water. And by doing it this method, I get pretty even slices. You can actually buy a tool that will mark a cake for you. Usually you can buy them 8s or 12s, and that can be a really nice tool to have. But 8s are not that hard to get pretty even slices, so I typically do it just by hand. And again, that's just one less dish you have to clean, because those tools can't actually cut through, they just mark. So that's it. This thing is cut. So if I'm ready for service, I'm going to let it thaw in the refrigerator, or if I'm really close to service, I'm going to let it come to room temperature, because this cake tastes way better at room temperature. So it just kind of depends on where I'm at with it, what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get ready to plate this soon.